Hi everybody, this is Bastiaan and today we're going to talk a bit about bayonet attack and smothered mates. So first let's set up the board. I was playing a 1950 opponent. So game starts with d4, g6. So we're seeing the beginning of the King's Indian defense. Knight f3, bishop to g7, e4, d6, c4. So we can see white gaining space in the center with pawns. Knight to f6, knight to c3, black castles, bishop to e2, e5, giving white the option to either exchange pawns or advance the pawns. I castle, leaving the pressure in the center. Knight to c6, d5, I advance, and knight to e7. And this is all still book. We have arrived at the Mar del Plata variation of the King's Indian. And now white has the possibility to play the bayonet attack, and the bayonet attack at this point is when white plays b4, which will in turn support a c5 pawn break. So the bayonet is played b4, and this is the bayonet formation with these pawn structures. Black plays knight to h5, so we're still in book, and this gives black the option for a f5 pawn break. But it also discourages a bishop to g5 move to pin knights on the queen, because then black can simply play f6. So knight development to g5 is typical in some formations against the King's Indian, but it's not a good idea at this point. I play bishop to e3 instead. And the two main continuations for black are to play either f5 or even knight to f6. And none of those were played because black is a very defensive player. We can see that the bishop on e3 is supporting the e3 a7 diagonal. We can see we already have a knight in, another bishop supporting. Queen is in the region, and another rook. And all these pieces will help push the pawns. White will have a space advantage and may hope to create a passed pawn on the queen side. So the bayonet is actually a queen side attack. Instead of knight to f4, which is not bad, it's just an example, which would lead to bishop takes, pawn recaptures, we can see that black has doubled pawns, but an attack on the knight on c3. But white can then play queen to d2 to protect the knight and attack the pawn on f7. Still not a bad continuation for black, although it's a complicated one. This wasn't played. Knight to f6 was played, so since I am looking to protect squares for the pawn advance, black is retreating his pieces as well in order to defend them. Queen to b3 for the same reason, supporting the pawn push. Bishop to g4, hoping to trade off pieces. I play h3, but black doesn't exchange. Again, black is a defensive player and wants to keep defending the squares on the queen side. Rook to b1, again to defend the pawn storm. Rook to e8, and we can see a problem for black. Now, white's pawns on the queen side have advanced too much, and his diagonal is being blocked by this pawn on e5. So white is hoping to remaneuver the bishop and perhaps protect the d6 pawn when needed. So a very defensive move by black. a4, c6. So now we are beginning to see the pressure with the pawn rows meeting each other. Knight to d2, not exchanging, but simply building up the pieces on the queen side. Queen to c7, black is doing the same. c5, adding even more pressure. I'm not afraid of black capturing the pawns, because after pawn takes pawn, I can recapture, and after pawn takes pawn, I can recapture, and we'll be left with a nice pawn island in the center. So we can see that we have 1, 2, 3 defenders on the pawn on d5, and 1, 2 defenders on the pawn on c5. So I'm pretty much covered at this point. Black exchanges, pawn takes pawn, I recapture, and now black doesn't capture the second pawn but plays bishop to f5 instead, attacking the rook, since there's become an opening in the defense on e4 after pawn takes pawn. So instead of moving the rook, which is fine, I play the in-between move, knight to b5, threatening the queen. And we can see that we have a space advantage on the queen side. Queen goes to d7. And now I simply grab the pawn on d6. And of course the knight cannot be recaptured, because it is protected by the queen, by the pawn. Meanwhile, I'm attacking the rook on e8. So bishop takes rook, and I could recapture the rook now right away, but I play another in-between move, bishop to b5, attacking the queen once again, which is running out of space. Queen goes to d8, and only now I take the rook on e8. Knight takes knight, rook takes bishop, so it looks like I'm up a pawn, but black has an attack on d5 with 2 pieces. I only have 1 defender, so it looks like black can simply recapture the pawn. And in fact, if he would choose not to do so and plays, say, h6 instead, I can play d6 and continue my space advantage and have a powerful passed pawn on d6, along with the 1 pawn advantage. So black doesn't play a random move, but of course recaptures the pawn, equalizing the material. And black of course is hoping now that we can trade off queens, but although the material is equal, there's still a tactical shot left for white. That's bishop to c6. Now the queen is forced to retreat, and I can still grab a free pawn with bishop to f7 check. Black plays king to h8, the only sensible move. And now knight to f3. And knight to f3 has a very specific reason. It not only opens up the d file for a rook to d1 attacking the queen, but it also attacks the pawn on e5. And this attack prevents black from remaneuvering the bishop to f8, where it can still be of use in order to stop the pawn advance, because there's nothing left on this diagonal for black to attack. So knight to f5 also forces the bishop on g7 and forces it out of play. Black plays knight to c6 instead, covering the e5 pawn and allowing remaneuvering of the bishop. Now at this point I could keep pushing the pawns and play b5. Instead I play bishop to d5, and the reason why is that I want to trade off pieces, and after black's recapture he will have two isolated pawns, which will be good for white. Black spots it, plays queen to d6 in order not to isolate his pawns. I grab the knight, black recaptures with the queen, but the knight is gone, and I still have an attack with my knight on the pawn on e5, again preventing remaneuvering of the bishop. So that's the second reason why these moves were played. I play b5 at this point. We note that the pawns, my pawn majority, is well protected, and all pieces are cooperating nicely on the queen side. Black's queen is under attack, queen to c7. Now rook to d1, rook to the open file. a6, b6, attacking the queen. Queen to c6. Now I could just close the formation and play a5, but instead I play knight to g5, and knight to g5 may lead to knight to e5, and may further support the pawn pushes. Of course, black cannot remaneuver the knight, the bishop to f8, because it's no longer needed to protect the pawn. If black tries to remaneuver, it's actually a trap, because then white can play knight to f7 check, king to g7, king to g8 makes no sense because of discovered check, after which we'll win the queen, if nothing else. Followed by bishop h6 check, king to f6, bishop g5 check, king to g7, knight to h6, and then the queen mate on f7 can no longer be prevented. So if you take it back, moving the bishop into the defense is a fatal mistake by black, so that can't be played. If the game were to continue in the spirit of the bayonet, black may have tried h6, then knight to f7 check, king h7, knight to d8, attacking both the pawn and the queen, queen to e4, only move to keep protecting the pawn, rook to d7, attacking the backwards pawn on b7, rook b8 to defend, and after that I can play queen to d7, adding even more pressure on the b7 pawn, and also attacking black's knight on e8. So that would be a common continuation in the bayonet attack to exploit my pawn majority and pawn advances on the queen side. So I was expecting the game to continue in that direction, but after swinging the knight into attack with knight to g5, black blunders and plays knight to f6 instead. And now we can play a smothered mate, and the game will end in a few moves. What we cannot do is queen to g8 check, because the king can recapture. I will show you why that this is important in a few seconds. What we need to do for a smothered mate is get our knight from g5 to h6 in order to protect the g8 square. So, knight to f7 check, king to g8 forced, knight goes to h6, that's the square where we want the knight, check. Of course, king to f8 cannot be played because of queen f7 mate, so the king is forced to retreat to h8, and only now can we play a queen sacrifice, queen to g8 check. And the difference now is that the queen is protected, and it's no longer possible for the king to recapture. Black can only recapture with knight or rook. So in this case, the knight recaptures, and I can play knight to f7 checkmate. And this is a smothered mate because the mate has been given by the knight, and Black's king is surrounded by his own pieces without any escape. So that's how we play the bayonet, and that's how a smothered mate works. So I hope you enjoyed the vid. Thanks for watching. Please leave a comment, and have a great evening.